The dust cloud rising from the eastern road caught Sarah Bennett's eye just as the bank foreclosure notice slipped from her trembling fingers, and she wondered if this stranger riding toward her failing ranch would be another creditor, come to pick clean the bones of everything her late husband had destroyed. She stood on the sagging porch of the main house, watching the lone rider approach through the shimmering heat of the Montana summer afternoon. It was 1883, and the land stretched endlessly in all directions, golden grass bending beneath a relentless sun that had baked the earth hard as iron. Her hand instinctively went to her throat, feeling the pulse beating there too fast, too anxious. At 26 years old, Sarah had buried her husband 6 months ago, and every day since had brought fresh evidence of Thomas Bennett's catastrophic decisions. The rider drew closer, and Sarah could make out more details now. A tall man on a dun-colored horse, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun, and even from this distance she could see the dust coating his clothes, the bedroll tied behind his saddle. A drifter, then, or perhaps a cowhand looking for work. Sarah's stomach twisted. She had no money to pay workers. The last 3 ranch hands had left 2 weeks ago, when she could not make their wages. Now it was just her, trying desperately to keep 200 head of cattle alive on land that seemed determined to turn to desert, trying to maintain fences and buildings that were falling apart from years of neglect, trying to hold together something that had been broken long before Thomas died. The rider reached the fence line and dismounted with fluid grace, looping his reins over the weathered post. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with dark hair curling slightly at his collar and eyes that were in startling shade of blue-gray when he lifted his head and looked directly at her. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and quiet, with an accent that spoke of Texas or perhaps farther south. "Name is Cole Maddox. I saw your place from the road, and I noticed some of your fencing down about a mile back. Cattle were starting to wander through." Sarah felt heat rush to her face that had nothing to do with the summer sun. "I know about the fence," she said, hearing the defensive edge in her own voice and hating it. "I have been meaning to fix it." Cole Maddox looked at her steadily, and Sarah had the uncomfortable sensation that he could see right through her brave words to the desperation beneath. "Fence mending is hard work for one person," he said carefully. "Especially this time of year with everything else that needs doing on a spread this size." "I manage," Sarah said. The lie tasted bitter. "I am sure you do." He paused, seeming to consider his next words. "I have been riding for a while, looking for a place to settle for a spell. I am good with cattle, good with horses, and I can fix just about anything that is broken. I would be willing to work in exchange for meals and a place to sleep. Would not need to take up space in the bunkhouse. I can make do in the barn." Sarah stared at him, trying to understand what he was really asking. "You want to work for food and shelter, no wages?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "What kind of man works for nothing?" Cole's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. The kind who has been hungry enough to know the value of a hot meal and a dry place to sleep. The kind who understands that sometimes people need help more than they need another mouth-demanding payment. He gestured toward the ranch buildings, the sagging barn, the corral with its broken rails. "You need help, ma'am. That much is plain, and I need a reason to stay in one place for a while. Seems like we might be able to help each other." Every instinct Sarah had developed over the past 6 months screamed at her to refuse, to send him on his way, to handle everything herself no matter how impossible that was. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that she could not save the ranch on her own. But those instincts had not fixed the fence or brought in the hay or repaired the barn roof that leaked in 3 places. Those instincts had not stopped the bank from sending foreclosure notices or the feed store from refusing her credit. "I cannot pay you," she said, needing him to understand completely. Not now, probably not for a long time. My husband left the ranch deep in debt, and I am barely keeping ahead of the interest payments. If you are looking for a place where you will eventually earn wages, this is not it." "I heard you the first time," Cole said simply. "I am not asking for pay." Sarah studied him, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere offering help that seemed too good to be real. He met her gaze without flinching, without the predatory calculation she had learned to recognize in men who thought a widow might be easy prey. There was something straightforward about him, something that made her want to trust him even though she knew better than to trust anyone. "All right," she heard herself say. "You can stay, meals twice a day, and you can sleep in the barn, but I warn you the work is hard and there is a lot of it." "I would expect nothing less, ma'am. My name is Sarah Bennett. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Bennett." He touched his hat brim again, and Sarah caught the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Should I start with that fence?" "Yes, the tools are in the barn. You will find wire and posts there too, though I do not know if there is enough. I will make do with what there is." Cole gathered his horse's reins and began walking toward the barn, moving with the loose-limbed stride of a man comfortable in his own skin. Sarah watched him go, then bent to retrieve the foreclosure notice from where it had fallen. The words swam before her eyes, black ink on white paper spelling out her doom in legal language. She had 3 months to bring her payments current, or the bank would take everything. 3 months to find money that did not exist, to save a ranch that her husband had run into the ground through a combination of bad decisions, worse luck, and a drinking problem that had eventually killed him. Thomas had been thrown from a horse in a drunken stupor, breaking his neck on impact. Sarah had grieved, but her grief had been complicated by anger and relief and guilt over feeling relieved. He had not been a bad man, not really. Just a weak one, unable to cope with the harsh realities of ranching in Montana territory, turning increasingly to whiskey to dull the edges of his failures. And now, Sarah was left to deal with the consequences of all those failures alone. Except she was not alone anymore. She had Cole Maddox, a drifter who worked for free and asked nothing in return. The situation should have made her more nervous than it did. Instead, she felt something she had not experienced in months, a tiny flicker of hope. The sun was setting by the time Cole returned to the main house, his shirt soaked with sweat and dust, his hands showing fresh calluses and scrapes. Sarah had dinner waiting, a simple meal of beans and cornbread and salt pork. She watched him eat with the steady focus of a man who had missed too many meals, who understood that food was not something to be taken for granted. "Got about half the fence line repaired," he said between bites. "We'll finish the rest tomorrow." "You were right about not having enough wire, but I made it work. Also noticed your water trough in the east pasture has a crack. Should probably address that soon before it splits completely." Sarah nodded, adding the water trough to the endless mental list of things that needed fixing. "Thank you." "For the fence, I mean. No need to thank me, that is why I am here." Cole wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then seemed to remember his manners and reached for the cloth napkin Sarah had set out. "How long have you been running this place alone?" "6 months, since my husband died." The words came easier now than they had at first. "Before that, we had 3 hands, but Thomas had not paid them in 2 months. They left as soon as he was buried. That must have been hard." Sarah laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Hard does not begin to cover it." "I knew things were bad, but I did not realize how bad until after the funeral when I started going through the books. Thomas had borrowed against the ranch 3 times, each time at worse terms than before. He owed money to the bank, to the feed store, to half the merchants in town. He had sold off most of our good breeding stock to cover gambling debts. When I took inventory, I found we had maybe a third of the cattle we should have had." Cole listened without interrupting, his eyes on her face. Sarah found herself talking more than she had intended, words spilling out like water from a broken dam. "Everyone in town knew he was drinking himself to death, but no one thought to tell me how bad the financial situation was. or maybe they did not know. Thomas was good at hiding things, good at making promises he could not keep. And now I am left trying to dig out from under all of it, trying to convince the bank to give me more time, trying to keep this ranch alive when maybe the kindest thing would be to just let it die. You do not believe that, Cole said quietly. How do you know what I believe? Because if you believed it, you would have already given up. You would have packed your things and moved back east or to town or wherever women go when they give up on ranching. But you are still here, still fighting, still trying to fix fences you cannot possibly fix alone. That tells me everything I need to know about what you believe. Sarah felt something catch in her throat. She looked away, blinking hard against the sting of tears she refused to shed. Maybe I am just stubborn. Stubborn is good. Stubborn keeps you alive out here. Cole pushed back from the table, gathering his plate and cup. Where should I wash these? Leave them. I will handle it. I pull my own weight, Mrs. Bennett. That includes cleaning up after myself. He found the wash basin and set to work, and Sarah watched him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. She did not understand this man, did not understand what he was really doing here or what he wanted from her. But for the first time in months, she was not facing everything alone, and that was enough for now. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Sarah had not experienced since the early days of her marriage, before Thomas's drinking became unbearable. Cole rose with the sun and worked until dark, tackling the endless list of repairs and maintenance with methodical efficiency. He fixed the fence, repaired the water trough, patched the barn roof, reinforced the corral rails. He checked the cattle, treating 2 cows for infection and castrating the late-season calves that Thomas had somehow missed. He cleaned out the well, sharpened tools, and reorganized the barn so that everything was accessible and functional. Sarah tried to match his pace, working alongside him when she could, handling the cooking and the garden and the chickens and the 100 other small tasks that kept a ranch house running. They did not talk much during the day, both too focused on the work at hand. But in the evenings, they would sit on the porch as the sun went down, and Cole would tell her about what needed doing next, and Sarah would try not to think about how natural it felt to have him there. 2 weeks after Cole arrived, Sarah rode into town to face down the bank manager. She had been putting off the confrontation, knowing that she had no good news to deliver, no miraculous solution to offer. But the foreclosure deadline was creeping closer, and she could not avoid it any longer. Bannerville was a small town, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a single dusty street. The bank occupied a prominent corner, a 2-story brick structure that looked ridiculously grand compared to everything around it. Sarah tied her horse outside and forced herself to walk through the front door, her spine straight and her head high despite the fear churning in her stomach. Marcus Whitfield, the bank manager, looked up from his desk with an expression that managed to be both sympathetic and impatient. Mrs. Bennett, I wondered when you would come see me. I am here to discuss the foreclosure notice, Sarah said, refusing to sit even when he gestured to a chair. I need more time. Mrs. Bennett, we have already extended your deadline twice. The bank has been more than patient given the circumstances. I understand that, and I appreciate it, but I am making progress. I have help now, a worker who is getting the ranch back into proper condition. If you could just give me another 6 months, I know I can start making regular payments. Whitfield sighed, removing his spectacles and polishing them with a handkerchief. Mrs. Bennett, Sarah, I am going to be frank with you. The amount you owe is substantial. Even if you make every payment perfectly from here on out, it will take you years to clear the debt. And that is assuming nothing goes wrong. No bad seasons, no cattle losses, no unexpected expenses. In my professional opinion, you would be better served selling the property now while you can still get something for it, and starting fresh somewhere else. That ranch is my home, Sarah said, her voice tight. It is all I have left. I understand that, but sentiment does not pay debts. Whitfield replaced his spectacles, his expression kind but firm. I can give you until the end of September. That is 3 months as the notice stated. But Mrs. Bennett, I strongly advise you to use that time to prepare for the sale, not to cling to false hope. Sarah left the bank with her hands shaking and her eyes burning. She stood on the wooden sidewalk, looking at the familiar buildings of Bannerville, seeing the curious glances of townsfolk who knew her situation and pitied her for it. She could not bear their pity. Could not bear the thought of giving up, of admitting defeat, of proving everyone right who had said that a woman could not run a ranch alone. She was so lost in her own thoughts that she did not notice the man approaching until he spoke. "Mrs. Bennett, good to see you in town." Sarah looked up to find Jake Thornton standing in front of her, his expensive suit and polished boots marking him as one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. He owned the Triple T, a massive spread that dwarfed her property, and he had made several offers to buy her land over the years, offers that Thomas had always refused. "Mr. Thornton," she said warily. "I heard you were having some financial difficulties," Thornton said, his tone oozing false sympathy. "Terrible thing, losing your husband and then discovering he left you in such a predicament. I am managing. Are you? Because I heard the bank is foreclosing. And I wanted you to know that my offer still stands. I would be willing to purchase your property for a fair price, enough to clear your debts and leave you with a little something to start over." Sarah looked at him, seeing the calculation behind his concern, the greed barely hidden beneath his sympathetic words. "The ranch is not for sale, Mr. Thornton. Mrs. Bennett, be reasonable. You cannot possibly hope to run that place alone, and your land borders mine. It makes sense for me to acquire it to consolidate the properties. I can offer you more than the bank will get at auction." I said no. Sarah pushed past him, moving toward her horse with quick, angry steps. Thornton followed her. "You are being foolish, woman. Stubborn pride is not going to save your ranch. Take my offer. It is the best you are going to get." Sarah mounted her horse and looked down at him, letting him see the fury in her eyes. "My husband made a lot of mistakes, Mr. Thornton, but one thing he got right was refusing to sell to you. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." She rode out of town at a gallop, not caring what people thought, needing to put distance between herself and Thornton and the bank and all of it. The ride home took an hour, and by the time she reached the ranch, some of her anger had cooled into a dull, heavy despair. Cole was in the corral working with one of the horses, a young mare that had never been properly broke. He looked up as Sarah dismounted, and whatever he saw in her face made him immediately tie off the lead rope and walk over to her. "What happened?" he asked. Sarah meant to brush off the question, to say everything was fine, but the words would not come. Instead, she felt her composure crack, felt the weight of the past 6 months come crashing down all at once. "I cannot do this," she whispered. "I cannot save the ranch. The bank manager all but told me I was wasting my time, and Jake Thornton cornered me with another offer to buy the property, and I cannot do this." "Yes, you can." Cole's voice was steady, certain. "You do not understand. The debt is too big. Even if we get everything running perfectly, even if we have the best season in years, I will never make enough to pay it all back. I am fighting a losing battle." "Maybe." Cole stepped closer, and Sarah found herself looking up into those blue-gray eyes. "But you have not lost yet. You still have 3 months. A lot can happen in 3 months. Like what? A miracle? Like a successful cattle drive, like selling enough head at market to make a significant payment, like proving to that bank manager that you are serious about keeping this ranch alive." His hand came up, hesitating for just a moment before he gently brushed a strand of hair back from her face. "You are not alone in this, Sarah. Not anymore." The use of her first name, the tenderness in the gesture, sent a shiver through Sarah that had nothing to do with fear. She realized how close they were standing, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. For just a moment, she let herself lean into that warmth, let herself imagine what it might be like to not carry everything alone. Then she stepped back, pulling herself together. "I should start dinner, Sarah. Cole caught her arm gently. "It is going to be all right, I promise you. You cannot promise that. Watch me." He smiled, and the expression transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Sarah's breath catch. "We are going to save your ranch, all of it, and no one, not the bank and not Jake Thornton, is going to take it from you." Sarah wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust in his certainty, his confidence. But she had learned the hard way that promises were easy to make and hard to keep. Still, she nodded, because what else could she do? She had no other options, no other hope. That night, after dinner, Cole spread out a map on the kitchen table and began making plans. "We have about 150 marketable cattle," he said, pointing to notes he had made. "If we can get them to the railhead in Helena, we should be able to get good prices. The fall market is strong right now, with Eastern buyers looking for beef. Helena is a 3-week drive," Sarah said, "and we would need at least 4 drovers to move that many cattle safely. I cannot afford to hire anyone. Then we do it ourselves. You, me, and maybe we can find 1 or 2 hands willing to work for a share of the profits instead of wages." Sarah shook her head. "It is too risky. What if we lose cattle along the way? What if the prices are not as good as we hope? What if something goes wrong? What if it goes right?" Cole countered. "Sarah, you are so focused on everything that could fail that you are not seeing the possibility of success. Yes, it is a risk. But doing nothing is also a risk, one that guarantees you will lose everything. At least this way you are fighting for something." He was right, and Sarah knew it. She looked at the map, at the route Cole had traced from their ranch to Helena, following rivers and established trails. It was possible, difficult, dangerous, exhausting, but possible. "All right," she said, "we will do it, but we need to move fast. If we are going to make the fall market, we need to leave within 2 weeks." Cole grinned, and Sarah felt that flutter in her chest again, that awareness of him as something more than just a worker on her ranch. 2 weeks it is. "I will start sorting the cattle tomorrow, picking out the best ones for the drive. You focus on supplies. We will need provisions for at least a month in case we run into delays." They worked late into the night, planning every detail, and when Sarah finally climbed the stairs to her bedroom, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Excitement. Fear, yes, and anxiety about all the things that could go wrong. But also excitement, the thrill of taking action, of refusing to simply accept defeat. She lay in bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch at night, and thought about Cole sleeping in the barn. Thought about the way he had looked at her today, the gentleness in his touch, the absolute conviction in his voice when he promised to save her ranch. She barely knew him. He had been here less than a month. But somehow he had become essential to her, not just for the work he did, but for the hope he brought with him. Sarah knew she was starting to feel more than gratitude, more than respect for his skills and appreciation for his help. She was starting to care about Cole Maddox in a way that scared her, in a way that felt dangerous and reckless and wonderful all at once. It was too soon. She was a widow, still grieving in her own complicated way. He was a drifter who would probably move on once the work was done. Nothing about this made sense, but her heart did not care about sense. Her heart had already started to beat faster when he walked into a room. Her heart had already started to notice the strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes, the rare smiles that transformed his face. Her heart was already halfway to falling in love with him, and Sarah did not know whether to be terrified or grateful. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Cole worked from dawn until well after dark, sorting cattle, repairing the chuck wagon they would use for the drive, checking every piece of equipment to make sure nothing would fail on the trail. Sarah threw herself into gathering supplies, making lists, purchasing what they absolutely needed and improvising the rest. She sold her mother's silver tea service to the general store for a fraction of its worth, and used the money to buy beans and flour and coffee. On the 4th day of preparations, Cole rode to the neighboring ranches looking for drovers willing to work for a profit share. He came back with 2 men, Both younger sons from struggling homesteads who saw the cattle drive as a chance to make more money than they could earn in a year of regular work. Tom Callahan was 19, freckled and eager, full of energy and optimism. Daniel Wright was 22, quieter and more serious, but with a reputation as an excellent horseman. Sarah met them both with a mixture of relief and anxiety. More hands meant the drive was actually possible, but it also meant more people depending on her, more people who would suffer if this gamble failed. "We will get your cattle to market, Mrs. Bennett," Tom said with the confidence of youth. "You can count on us." "I appreciate that, Tom. But I need you both to understand the risks. This is not a sure thing. We might lose cattle, we might run into bad weather, we might get to Helena and find the market has collapsed. I cannot guarantee you will make money on this drive." "We understand, ma'am," Daniel said. "But we believe in what you are doing, and Mr. Maddox says you are good people. That is enough for us." Sarah glanced at Cole, who was checking the cinch on his saddle and studiously not looking at her. "Mr. Maddox says you are good people." The words warmed her more than they should have. She barely knew what Cole thought of her beyond the work, beyond the business arrangement that had brought him here. To know that he spoke well of her to others, that he believed in her enough to convince these young men to risk their time and effort, meant more than she could express. The night before they were set to leave, Sarah could not sleep. She kept running through the lists in her mind, checking and rechecking, certain she must have forgotten something crucial. Finally, she gave up and went downstairs, thinking she would make tea, maybe review the supply inventory one more time. She found Cole sitting at the kitchen table, the map spread out before him, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. He looked up when she entered, and something passed between them, an understanding that they were both too anxious to rest. "Could not sleep?" he asked. "Too much to think about." Sarah moved to the stove, stirring the coals back to life and setting the kettle to boil. "You? Same. I keep thinking about the river crossings, about the best places to bed down the herd at night." He rubbed his face, and Sarah noticed the exhaustion in the gesture, the weight he was carrying. "Want to sit?" She joined him at the table, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment, just sharing the quiet space. Outside, a coyote howled, and the sound seemed to emphasize how alone they were out here, how isolated from everything and everyone. "Cole," Sarah said slowly, "why are you really doing this? And do not tell me it is just for meals and a place to sleep. You have worked harder in the past month than any man I have ever known, and you have asked for nothing in return. Why?" He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup as if it held answers. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "I grew up on a ranch in Texas. My family had a small place, nothing fancy, but it was ours. When I was 15, my father borrowed money to expand the herd, thinking it would make us more profitable. Instead, we had 2 bad years in a row. Drought, disease, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The bank foreclosed, took everything. My father was never the same after that. He died a few years later, and I always believed it was because losing the ranch broke something in him." Sarah reached across the table without thinking, covering his hand with hers. Cole turned his palm up, lacing their fingers together, and the simple contact sent warmth flooding through her. "I have been drifting ever since," Cole continued. "Working ranches, moving on when the work dried up or when I got restless. I told myself I liked the freedom, liked not being tied down to any one place, but the truth is I have been running. Running from the memory of watching my father lose everything, running from my own fear of caring about something enough to be destroyed when it is taken away." "Then why stop running now?" Sarah asked softly. "Why stay here and help me?" Cole looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Because when I saw you standing on that porch, holding that foreclosure notice, I saw my father. I saw what it looks like when someone is fighting with everything they have and losing anyway. And I thought, maybe this time it could be different. Maybe this time I could help save the ranch instead of watching it slip away." "That is not the only reason," Sarah said, feeling bold, feeling reckless. "Is it?" No. Cole's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, and Sarah felt the touch all the way to her bones. No, it is not. I stayed because of you, Sarah. Because you are the strongest person I have ever met, because you face down impossible odds with your head high. Because you make me want to stop running and start building something real. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. They were still holding hands across the table, and the space between them felt charged, electric. She should pull away. Should remember that she was a widow, that he was her worker, that this was inappropriate in every possible way. But she did not want to pull away. She wanted to lean closer, wanted to close the distance between them and see where this connection might lead. Cole, she whispered, and his name on her lips felt like a promise. He stood, moving around the table without releasing her hand, drawing her to her feet. They were close now, close enough that Sarah could feel the heat of his body, could see the pulse beating in his throat. His free hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palm. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice rough. "Tell me this is not what you want and I will walk away. I will still work the ranch, still help with the cattle drive. But you have to tell me, Sarah, because if you do not, I am going to kiss you." Sarah could not find words. Her mind was spinning, her body hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. She had been married for 4 years, but Thomas had never made her feel like this, never made her skin tingle and her pulse race. What she felt for Cole was entirely different, intense and consuming and real in a way her marriage had never been. Instead of speaking, she rose up on her toes and closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in answer. The kiss started gentle, tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then Cole's arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate. Sarah melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had been spinning out of control for too long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Sarah," he breathed. "God, Sarah?" "I know," she said, because she did know. She knew this was crazy, knew it was too fast, knew that she should be more cautious. But she also knew that Cole Maddox had walked into her life at exactly the moment she needed him most, and that felt like fate. "We should probably talk about this," Cole said, though he made no move to let her go. "Tomorrow," Sarah said. "After the drive, we will talk about everything then." "For now, I just want," she trailed off, not sure how to finish. "I know," Cole echoed her words back to her. "I know." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise of more to come. Then, with visible reluctance, he stepped back. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Sarah nodded, though she doubted she would sleep any better now than she had before. She watched Cole gather his hat and head for the door, watched the way he moved, and felt her heart squeeze tight with an emotion she was not quite ready to name. "Cole," she called, and he turned back. "Thank you." "For everything." He smiled, that rare smile that transformed his face. "We are in this together now, Sarah. All the way through." The cattle drive began at dawn. Sarah had been on drives before, years ago when her father was still alive and she was just a girl learning the ranching life. But this was different. This time, the weight of everything rested on her shoulders, and every decision could mean the difference between saving her ranch and losing it forever. Cole took point, leading the herd north toward Helena. Tom and Daniel rode flanks, keeping the cattle moving in the right direction and preventing strays from breaking away. Sarah brought up the rear with the chuck wagon, managing the supplies and making sure nothing was left behind. It was hard, grueling work, made worse by the late summer heat and the dust that rose in choking clouds from hundreds of hooves. The first 3 days were the hardest. The cattle were not used to traveling, and they balked and scattered and tried to turn back toward familiar territory. It took all 4 riders working in constant motion to keep the herd together, and by nightfall, everyone was exhausted and covered in dust. But gradually, the cattle settled into a rhythm. They learned to follow the lead steer, learned that there was food and water waiting at the end of each day's drive. The humans found their rhythm too, learning to work together, learning to anticipate problems before they became crises. Sarah watched Cole work with growing admiration. He was a natural leader, calm and decisive, but never arrogant. He treated Tom and Daniel with respect, teaching them better techniques, praising them when they did well. He handled the cattle with a mixture of firmness and patience that got results without causing panic. And in the evenings, after they had the herd settled and dinner eaten, he would sit with Sarah and go over the next day's route, making sure she understood every decision. They did not kiss again, though Sarah felt the awareness humming between them constantly. There was no privacy on a cattle drive, no opportunity for the kind of conversation they needed to have. But sometimes their hands would brush as they both reached for the coffee pot. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the campfire, and everything else would fade away for just a moment. Sometimes Sarah would wake in the night and see Cole standing watch, silhouetted against the stars, and feel a fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with the ranch and everything to do with the man himself. On the 7th day, they reached the first major river crossing. The water was running high from late summer storms in the mountains, and the current was strong. Cole rode his horse into the river first, testing the depth and the footing, while the others held the herd back. "It is passable," he called back, water streaming from his clothes. "But we need to be careful. Tom, you take the lead steer across. Daniel, you push from behind. Sarah, wait until we have at least half the herd on the other side before you try to cross with the wagon." They moved into position, and Tom urged the lead steer into the water. The animal balked, but Tom was persistent, and finally the steer plunged forward. The rest of the herd followed, driven by instinct and the pressure from behind. It was chaos, cattle bellowing and water churning, and everyone shouting to be heard over the noise. Sarah watched with her heart in her throat as the herd crossed, praying that no one would be swept away, that no cattle would be lost. Cole was in the thick of it, his horse dancing through the current, turning back strays and keeping the crossing organized. He looked completely in his element, confident and competent and utterly focused. When most of the herd was safely across, Sarah drove the chuck wagon into the river. The water was cold and shockingly strong, pushing against the wagon wheels, making the horses nervous. She kept them steady through sheer force of will, talking to them constantly, guiding them toward the far bank. Halfway across, she felt the wagon lurch as one wheel dropped into a hole. The current caught it, and suddenly they were sliding sideways, the wagon tilting dangerously. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat as she fought to control the horses, but the current was too strong and the angle was all wrong. Then Cole was there, his horse lunging through the water, his rope already in his hands. He threw a loop around the wagon tongue and dallied it around his saddle horn, and his horse dug in, straining against the current. Slowly, inch by inch, the wagon righted itself and moved forward. Sarah kept the horses pulling, and together, she and Cole dragged the wagon to safety on the far bank. Sarah was shaking by the time they reached solid ground. She set the brake and climbed down, her legs weak and her hands trembling. Cole was off his horse in an instant, gripping her shoulders, his eyes searching her face. "Are you all right?" His voice was tight with concern. "I am fine." "Just shaken." Sarah tried to smile and did not quite manage it. "Thank you, if you had not been there." "But I was there." Cole pulled her close, and Sarah let herself lean into him, let herself take the comfort he was offering. Around them, Tom and Daniel were still working the herd, and the cattle were milling around, unsettled by the crossing. But for just a moment, Sarah let the world narrow down to the feel of Cole's arms around her, the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "We are a good team," she said softly. "Yes," Cole agreed. "We are." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and the expression on his face made Sarah's breath catch. There was concern there, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked like the feelings she had been trying to deny in herself. "Sarah, when this is over, when we get back to the ranch, we need to talk, really talk." I know. Because what I feel for you, it is not just, this is not, he trailed off, frustrated with his own inability to find the right words. Sarah reached up and touched his face, feeling the rasp of his beard beneath her palm. I know, she said again, and this time it was a promise. They pressed on, driving the cattle through the last weeks of summer and into early fall. The weather held, though they had a few tense days when storm clouds gathered on the horizon and everyone braced for rain that would turn the trail into mud. They passed other cattle drives heading to market, exchanged news and warnings about trail conditions, and kept moving north. Sarah felt herself changing during those weeks on the trail. She grew leaner and harder, her hands developing new calluses, her face bronzing from constant sun exposure. But more than the physical changes, she felt something shift inside her. The woman who had stood on the ranch porch holding a foreclosure notice, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had learned that she was capable of far more than she had believed, and through it all there was Cole. Cole working beside her, Cole making her laugh with dry observations about the cattle, Cole sitting with her in the evenings and talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he could play the harmonica, though not particularly well, and that he had once wanted to be a schoolteacher before his family lost their ranch. She learned that he liked his coffee black and his beans with extra chili pepper, and that he had a scar on his shoulder from a bull goring when he was 16. She learned 100 small things about him, and each one made her care for him more. On the 20th day, they crested a rise and saw Helena spread out in the valley below, the railroad tracks gleaming in the afternoon sun. Sarah felt a surge of relief and triumph and terror all mixed together. They had made it. Against all odds, they had brought the cattle to market. Now came the hard part, selling them for enough money to save the ranch. They drove the herd into the holding pens on the outskirts of town, and Cole went to find the cattle buyers while Sarah, Tom, and Daniel set up camp. Sarah was too anxious to rest. She paced the camp, checking and rechecking the cattle count, trying to calculate what price they would need to make this drive worth the effort. Cole returned an hour later with a buyer, a rotund man named Harrison who looked at the cattle with the assessing eye of someone who had been in the business for decades. He walked among the herd, checking their condition, examining their teeth and their hooves. Then he turned to Sarah with a nod. "These are good quality animals, Mrs. Bennett, well cared for. I can offer you $32 a head." Sarah did a rapid calculation in her head. $32 times 147 cattle that had survived the drive. That would be $4,704. That is correct. It was more money than Sarah had seen in years, more than enough to bring her bank payments current, to pay off some of the smaller debts, to buy supplies for the winter. But as she looked at the cattle, at the animals she had worked so hard to raise and bring to market, she heard herself say, "I need $35 a head." Harrison frowned. "Mrs. Bennett, 32 is a fair price. These are not just fair cattle, Mr. Harrison, these are exceptional cattle. They are well-fed, healthy, and ready to ship east immediately. You will not find better quality in any other pen in Helena. $35 a head, or I will take them to another buyer." Sarah could feel Cole watching her, could sense Tom and Daniel holding their breath. This was a gamble. If Harrison walked away, if she could not get a better price elsewhere, she would have lost her chance. Harrison looked at the cattle again, then back at Sarah. $33, that is my final offer. $34, Sarah countered. And you throw in the cost of feed while they are in your pens. There was a long pause, then Harrison stuck out his hand. You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Bennett. $34 a head plus feed, we have a deal. Sarah shook his hand, trying to keep her expression neutral even though she wanted to shout with triumph. $34 a head meant $5,000. $5,000 to save her ranch, to prove that she could do this, to show everyone who had doubted her that a woman could run a ranch as well as any man. After Harrison left to draw up the sale papers, Cole caught Sarah around the waist and lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle. "You did it," he said, his face split by an enormous grin. "Sarah, you did it." Tom and Daniel were whooping and clapping, and Sarah found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in longer than she could remember. When Cole set her down, she was dizzy and breathless and happier than she had been in years. They celebrated that night with a real meal in a Helena restaurant. The four of them crowded around a table, eating steak and potatoes and pie until they were uncomfortably full. Tom and Daniel were already planning what they would do with their share of the profits, talking about new saddles and maybe a trip to see family they had not visited in years. Sarah caught Cole's eye across the table and felt her heart swell with gratitude and affection, and something much deeper. He had made this possible. He had given her back hope when she had none, had worked beside her without asking for anything in return, had believed in her when everyone else had written her off. She did not know what she had done to deserve Cole Maddox walking into her life, but she was grateful for it every single day. After dinner, while Tom and Daniel went to explore the town, Sarah and Cole walked the quiet streets of Helena. The evening was cool, a hint of autumn in the air, and Sarah wrapped her shawl around her shoulders against the chill. "You should be proud of yourself," Cole said as they walked. "What you did today, negotiating with Harrison like that, it took courage." "I learned from watching you," Sarah said. "You never back down, never accept less than what something is worth. I figured I could do the same." "You did better than I could have. You saved your ranch today, Sarah." "We saved the ranch," she corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you, Cole." They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land and the sky was vast above them, scattered with stars. Cole stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen, really listen, before you say anything." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "All right. When I came to your ranch, I told you I was looking for a place to settle for a while. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I have been looking for a home, not just a place to work, but a real home, a place where I belong, where I am not just passing through. I think I found that with you." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but Cole held up a hand. "Let me finish. I know this is fast. I know you are still dealing with everything your husband left behind. I know that I am just a drifter who showed up out of nowhere. But Sarah, somewhere along the way I fell in love with you. With your strength, your stubbornness, your refusal to give up no matter what. With the way you face down impossible odds and come out fighting, with everything you are." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, but she was smiling through them. "Are you finished?" "Not quite." Cole took both of her hands in his, and his voice was shaking slightly. "I want to stay. Not just until the ranch is paid off, not just until spring. I want to stay forever. I want to help you build that ranch into something amazing. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to spend my life proving that I am worthy of your trust. Sarah Bennett, I am asking if you will let me stay. If you will give us a chance." "Cole Maddox," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "you showed up at my ranch when I had lost everything, and you gave it all back to me. You gave me hope and purpose and something to fight for. But more than that, you gave me yourself. You have already proven your worth 1,000 times over. So yes, I will give us a chance. I will give us every chance. Because I fell in love with you two, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Cole closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing her words, as if they were something precious he needed to hold carefully. Then he pulled her close and kissed her, and Sarah poured everything she felt into that kiss, all the fear and hope and love that had been building for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably get back to camp before Tom and Daniel start spreading rumors." Sarah laughed. "Too late for that. I am pretty sure they have been gossiping about us since the first week of the drive." "Well, then let us give them something real to gossip about." Cole kissed her again, slower this time, sweeter, a promise of all the tomorrows they would share. They returned to the ranch 3 weeks later, after Sarah had paid off a significant portion of her debt to the bank, settled accounts with several merchants, and purchased winter supplies. Tom and Daniel had taken their shares and said grateful goodbyes, promising to come back in the spring if Sarah needed extra hands for calving season. The ranch looked different to Sarah now, or perhaps she was the one who had changed. The buildings were still old, still in need of constant maintenance, but they no longer seemed to be falling apart. Cole had repaired so much during his time there, and with money in the bank, she could afford to hire help for the bigger projects. The land spread out around them, golden in the autumn light, and Sarah saw not a burden but a blessing, a place of possibility. Cole moved his things from the barn into the main house without discussion. It felt natural, inevitable, as if they had been heading toward this moment from the day he rode up to her fence line. Sarah found she loved sharing the house with him, loved the morning ritual of making coffee together, the evening conversations on the porch, the simple pleasure of not being alone. They fell into an easy partnership, dividing the ranch work between them, making decisions together. Sarah handled the books and the business side of things, while Cole managed the day-to-day operations. But there was significant overlap, with each of them learning from the other, growing stronger together than they had been apart. In October, Sarah made a trip to the bank to make her next payment. Marcus Whitfield looked shocked when she walked in and placed a stack of bills on his desk. "This is 3 months of payments," he said, counting it twice to be sure, "plus a significant amount toward the principal." "Yes," Sarah said, unable to keep the satisfaction out of her voice, "and there will be more in the spring after calving season." Whitfield leaned back in his chair, studying her with new respect. "Mrs. Bennett, I have to admit I did not think you could pull this off. I am impressed." "I had help," Sarah said simply, "and I am not giving up on that ranch ever. I can see that now. I will make sure these payments are properly recorded, and Mrs. Bennett, congratulations. You have done what very few people in your situation could do." Sarah left the bank with her head high, feeling vindicated and proud. She had proven everyone wrong. She had saved her ranch, and she was going to keep saving it, one payment at a time, until the debt was completely gone. When she got home, she found Cole in the barn, repairing a saddle. He looked up as she entered, a smile spreading across his face. "How did it go?" "Perfectly." Whitfield looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Sarah crossed the barn and wrapped her arms around Cole, resting her head against his chest. "We did it, Cole, we really did it." "You did it," he corrected gently. "I just helped." "No, we did it together." She tilted her head back to look at him. "And we are going to keep doing it, together, for as long as you will have me." "That would be forever then," Cole said, and kissed her until she forgot about banks and debts and everything except the warmth of his arms around her. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Cole reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Sarah's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "It is not much," Cole said, his voice uncertain in a way she rarely heard from him. "I know you were married before, and maybe you are not ready for this. But Sarah, I want to marry you. I want to stand up in front of everyone and promise to spend my life with you. I want to make this official, make us official. Will you marry me?" Sarah looked at the ring, at the man offering it, and felt joy bubble up inside her like a spring. "Yes," she said, not a trace of hesitation in her voice. "Yes, Cole, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her close, and they sat together as the stars came out, planning their future. They were married in late November in Bannerville's small church, with half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a simple blue dress, and Cole wore his best suit, and when the preacher asked if they promised to love and honor each other, they both answered with voices strong and sure. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and drink, with music and dancing that lasted long into the night. Sarah danced with her new husband beneath the Montana sky, surrounded by people who had doubted her and were now celebrating her success. and felt happier than she had ever thought possible. Jake Thornton showed up uninvited, sulking in a corner, clearly unhappy that Sarah had proven him wrong. She ignored him completely, refusing to let his presence diminish her joy. She had won. She had saved her ranch, found love, and built a life worth living. Thornton's disapproval meant nothing. As winter settled over Montana, Sarah and Cole worked together to prepare the ranch for the cold months. They brought the cattle to lower pastures, stockpiled hay and grain, repaired every building to ensure nothing would fail when the temperature dropped. It was hard work, but Sarah found she enjoyed it more than she ever had before. With Cole beside her, even the most grueling tasks felt manageable. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire in the main house, and Cole gave Sarah a leather-bound journal. "For recording the ranch accounts," he said. "So you can keep track of everything, make sure we are staying on course." Sarah opened the journal and found that Cole had already written on the first page. It was a list of goals for the ranch, things they hoped to accomplish in the coming years. Expand the herd, build a new barn, plant an orchard, hire permanent ranch hands. Each goal was carefully written out with notes about costs and timelines, but it was the last line that made Sarah's eyes sting with tears. "Build a life together that honors the land and each other." "Cole," she whispered, not trusting her voice. "We are going to do amazing things, Sarah," he said, pulling her close. "This is just the beginning." Winter passed slowly but peacefully. Snow blanketed the land, turning everything white and quiet. Sarah and Cole spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other, planning for spring, simply enjoying the peace of being together. Sometimes they would venture out to check on the cattle, bundled in heavy coats and scarves, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Sometimes they would stay inside all day, comfortable in their shared solitude. In late February, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She sat with the knowledge for a few days, half afraid to believe it, half afraid of what it would mean. She and Thomas had never had children, and she had assumed the fault lay with her. But now, carrying Cole's child, she felt a fierce joy mixed with terror. What if something went wrong? What if she lost the baby? What if she was not a good mother? She finally told Cole one evening after dinner, blurting it out without preamble. "I am going to have a baby." Cole froze, a dish still in his hands, his eyes wide. "A baby, Sarah, are you sure?" "Yes, I am sure." He set the dish down carefully, then crossed to her and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby." His voice was filled with wonder and delight, and Sarah found herself laughing, her fears dissolving in the face of his pure happiness. "Are you happy about this?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy, Sarah, I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled." He set her down gently, his hands going to her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby." "It is early yet," Sarah cautioned. "Anything could happen." "Then we will face it together," Cole said firmly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Spring arrived with a rush of warmth and new life. The snow melted, revealing green grass beneath, and the cattle began dropping calves. Sarah's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she struggled with nausea in the early months and exhaustion that left her needing afternoon naps. Cole became fiercely protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, and they had their first real argument when Sarah insisted she was perfectly capable of helping with the calving. "You should be resting," Cole said, his voice tight with worry. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Sarah shot back. "I can help, I want to help. This is my ranch too." "I know that, but I do not want anything to happen to you or the baby." "Nothing is going to happen. Women have been having babies and working ranches for generations." "I am not made of glass, Cole." They glared at each other for a long moment, then Cole sighed and pulled her into his arms. "I am sorry, you are right, I am just worried. I know, and I love you for it, but you have to trust that I know my own limits." Sarah kissed him softly. "We are partners, remember? That means we work together." "Together," Cole agreed. "Always together." They hired 2 permanent ranch hands in April, young men from town looking for steady work. With the extra help, the ranch ran more smoothly than it ever had. Sarah was able to focus on the business side of things while Cole managed the workers, and together they built something strong and profitable. In May, Sarah made another large payment to the bank. Whitfield was positively friendly now, asking about her plans for expansion, treating her with the respect she had earned. Sarah left his office feeling vindicated and proud, knowing that she had exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. Summer arrived hot and dry, and Sarah's pregnancy became uncomfortable in the heat. She was huge now, her belly stretching her dresses to their limits, her back aching constantly. Cole doted on her, bringing her cool drinks, rubbing her feet in the evenings, building her a rocking chair so she could sit comfortably on the porch. "I feel like a cow," Sarah grumbled one particularly hot afternoon. Cole laughed and kissed her forehead. "You are the most beautiful cow I have ever seen." "That is not as romantic as you think it is. You are beautiful," Cole said seriously. "Pregnancy suits you, you are glowing." "I am sweating," Sarah corrected. But she leaned into him, grateful for his presence, grateful for his unwavering support. Their son was born in late August, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and turned the world outside into a wall of rain. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah was certain she would not survive it. But Cole stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement when she wanted to give up. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and screaming, Sarah burst into tears. Cole cut the cord with shaking hands, then placed their son on Sarah's chest, and they both stared at the tiny creature they had created. "He is perfect," Cole whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "He is," Sarah agreed, running her finger over the baby's downy head. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but had never settled on anything. Now, looking at her son, Sarah knew exactly what his name should be. "James, after my father." "James Maddox," Cole said, testing it out. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world." Little James Maddox proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who kept his parents awake most of the night for the first few weeks. Sarah was exhausted, sore, and overwhelmed, but also happier than she had ever been. She would sit in the rocking chair Cole had built, nursing her son, and feel a peace that seemed to settle into her very bones. Cole was a natural father, patient and gentle with James, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with the baby when he cried, singing off-key lullabies that somehow worked to soothe him. Sarah watched them together and fell even more deeply in love with her husband, seeing this new side of him. The ranch continued to prosper. The fall cattle drive was even more successful than the previous years, and Sarah was able to pay off another significant chunk of the debt. By the time James celebrated his first birthday, the ranch was financially stable for the first time in years, with money in the bank and a growing reputation for quality cattle. Sarah and Cole stood on the porch one evening, watching their son take his first wobbling steps across the yard. The Montana sky was vast above them, painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun set. Sarah leaned against her husband, feeling the solid strength of him, feeling the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Stopping here, giving up the drifting life?" Cole wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Not for a single second. This is where I belong, Sarah, with you and James. This is home." "I love you," Sarah said, the words coming easily now without fear or hesitation. "I love you too." Cole kissed the top of her head. "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They stood together as the stars came out, as James babbled to himself in the yard, as the ranch settled into evening quiet. Sarah thought about how far she had come from that day when Cole first rode up to her fence line. She had been drowning then, suffocating under the weight of debt and fear and loneliness. And Cole had thrown her a lifeline, had pulled her to safety without asking for anything in return, but he had gotten something anyway. He had gotten a home, a family, a life worth living, and so had she. 3 years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. The ranch continued to grow, and Sarah was able to pay off the last of the debt to the bank on a crisp October morning. When she walked out of the bank holding the deed to her land, free and clear, she felt a sense of triumph that brought tears to her eyes. Cole was waiting outside with James, now 4 years old and the spitting image of his father. When he saw Sarah's expression, Cole grinned and lifted James onto his shoulders. "We did it," he asked, though he already knew the answer. "We did it," Sarah confirmed. "The ranch is ours, completely and totally ours." Cole swept her into a kiss that had James giggling and demanding to know what was happening. "Your mother just accomplished something amazing," Cole told his son. "She saved our ranch." "We saved our ranch," Sarah corrected, taking Cole's hand. "Together." They walked down Bannerville's Main Street as a family, heads high, hearts full. People nodded to them respectfully, acknowledging what they had achieved. Even Jake Thornton, sitting outside the saloon, gave a grudging nod of recognition. Sarah nodded back, feeling generous in her victory. That evening, they had a celebration at the ranch. Tom and Daniel came, both now running their own small homesteads with the money they had earned from that first cattle drive. The ranch hands came, along with several neighboring families. There was food and drink and music, and Sarah danced with her husband under the stars, just as she had on their wedding night. "What do you want to do now?" Cole asked as they swayed to the music. "Now that the debt is paid and the ranch is secure," Sarah thought about it. "I want to expand. Build that new barn we have been talking about, maybe plant that orchard, hire more permanent hands so we can take some time for ourselves." "I like the sound of that." Cole spun her gently. "Anything else?" "I want another baby," Sarah said, feeling bold. "James needs a sibling." Cole's eyes lit up. "I like the sound of that even more. And I want to spend every day of the rest of my life with you," Sarah continued, her voice soft and serious now. "I want to grow old on this ranch with our children and eventually our grandchildren. I want to build something that lasts, something we can be proud of." "We already have," Cole said, touching her face tenderly. "We already have, Sarah." Their daughter was born the following summer, a tiny thing with Sarah's dark hair and Cole's blue-gray eyes. They named her Emma, and she proved to be as strong-willed as her mother and as patient as her father. James adored his baby sister, constantly wanting to help with her care, bringing her toys and singing to her in his childish voice. The new barn was completed that fall, a sturdy structure that would serve the ranch for generations. Cole carved their initials and the date into one of the beams, a permanent record of what they had built together. Sarah stood with him as he worked, Emma sleeping against her shoulder, James playing at their feet, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "Thank you," she said quietly. Cole looked up from his carving. "For what?" "For everything. For stopping at my ranch that day, for staying. For helping me save everything I loved. For giving me a life better than any I could have imagined." Cole set down his tools and came to her, wrapping his arms around his family. "You saved yourself, Sarah. I just provided some support along the way. Everything you have achieved, you earned through your own strength and determination." "We earned it," Sarah insisted. "Together." "Together," Cole agreed and sealed it with a kiss. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. James and Emma grew strong and capable, learning the ranching business from both their parents. More children followed, 2 more boys and another girl, until the house was full of noise and laughter and life. The ranch prospered beyond Sarah's wildest dreams. They expanded their holdings, purchasing adjacent land when it became available. They built a reputation for integrity and quality that brought buyers from across the territory. Other ranchers came to Cole for advice, recognizing his expertise. Sarah became known as one of the shrewdest businesswomen in Montana, respected for her intelligence and her refusal to back down from a challenge. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole took Sarah on a trip to Helena, leaving the children with trusted neighbors. They stayed in a hotel, ate at fancy restaurants, and spent their days exploring the growing city. But Sarah found she was eager to get home, eager to return to the ranch and the life they had built there. "I never thought I could be this happy," she told Cole as they sat on the train heading home. "When you first arrived at the ranch, I was so lost. I did not think I would survive, let alone thrive." "You would have survived," Cole said with certainty. "You would have found a way. You are the strongest person I have ever known." "Maybe, but it would have been so much harder without you. And so much lonelier." Sarah laced her fingers through his. "You gave me everything, Cole. Hope, love, a family, a future. How do I ever repay that?" "You already have," Cole said simply. "Every day you repay it, by being yourself, by loving me, by building this life with me." "That is all I ever wanted, Sarah, to belong somewhere to someone. You gave me that." "We gave it to each other," Sarah said, and rested her head on his shoulder, watching the Montana landscape roll past outside the window. When they returned home, they found the ranch running smoothly under the management of their oldest children and the experienced ranch hands. James, now 14, had handled a crisis with some rustlers with maturity and good sense. Emma, 12, had kept the household accounts perfectly organized. The younger children had done their chores without complaint. Sarah felt pride swell in her chest as she looked at what she and Cole had created. Not just a successful ranch, but a family. Not just children, but capable, confident young people who would carry on the legacy they had built. More years passed, and Sarah's children began to leave home, starting families of their own. James married a rancher's daughter from the next county and started his own spread with Cole's help. Emma became a teacher in Bannerville, marrying a gentle man who adored her. The younger children followed their own paths, some staying close to home, others venturing farther afield. Through it all, Sarah and Cole remained the constants, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew older together, silver appearing in their hair, lines deepening on their faces. But they never lost the connection that had drawn them together, the love that had sustained them through every challenge. On a spring evening, when Sarah was 52 and Cole was 54, they sat on the porch of the ranch house, much as they had done countless times before. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, and the sound of their laughter filled the air. The ranch spread out around them, green and thriving, a testament to decades of hard work and careful stewardship. "Do you remember the day you rode up here?" Sarah asked, taking Cole's hand. "When I was standing on this porch holding that foreclosure notice?" "I remember," Cole said. "You looked terrified and furious all at once. I almost kept riding. I am glad you did not." "So am I." Cole squeezed her hand. "Best decision I ever made stopping here, mine too, letting you stay." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their grandchildren, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here, all the obstacles they had overcome, all the joy they had found. She thought about the scared, desperate widow she had been and the confident, successful woman she had become. "I love you," she said, the words as natural as breathing after all these years. "I love you too," Cole responded, as he always did. "Forever." Sarah leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, feeling the peace that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The ranch they had saved together would continue long after they were gone, passed down to their children and their children's children. But more importantly, the love they had built would continue, a legacy more valuable than any amount of land or cattle. The sun set slowly over the Montana landscape, painting the sky in brilliant colors. And Sarah and Cole sat together, hands intertwined, hearts full, watching the day end and knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. They would face them all together, just as they always had, just as they always would. The story of how a cowboy had worked a drowning ranch free without asking a cent had become legend in the territory. But those who knew the truth understood that it was not just one person's gift to another. It was two people choosing to build something together, choosing to fight for what they believed in, choosing love and partnership over fear and isolation. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference. Years later, when Sarah was old and gray, sitting in the rocking chair Cole had built for her so many decades ago, she would tell her great-grandchildren about the day a stranger rode up to a failing ranch and changed everything. She would tell them about hard work and determination, about the importance of never giving up no matter how impossible things seemed. But most of all, she would tell them about love, about finding someone who believed in you when you could not believe in yourself, about building a life together that honored the land and each other. And the children would listen, wide-eyed and fascinated, not knowing that they were hearing the story of their own heritage, the foundation upon which their entire world was built. Cole passed away first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Sarah holding his hand. She grieved deeply but without bitterness, grateful for every moment they had shared. She continued to run the ranch for another 5 years, refusing to slow down, refusing to let age defeat her. When she finally joined Cole, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, her last words were a whisper. Together, always together. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch beneath a stone that read, Cole and Sarah Maddox, partners in life, in love, in everything. Their graves were always covered in wildflowers, placed there by family members who remembered their story and wanted to honor the love that had created a legacy. The ranch continued to prosper for generations, always remaining in the family, always carrying the values that Sarah and Cole had instilled. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could hear laughter on the porch, could see 2 figures sitting close together, watching the sunset over the land they had saved and loved. The story of Sarah and Cole became more than just a family legend. It became a symbol of what was possible when 2 people chose to face life's challenges together, when they refused to give up, when they believed in something bigger than themselves. It became a reminder that love, real love, was not just about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about showing up every day and doing the work, about choosing each other again and again, about building something that would last long after you were gone. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the ranch, not the fortune, not the land that stretched for miles. But the love story that had started with a foreclosure notice and a drifter looking for a place to belong, and had grown into something eternal, something that would be remembered and celebrated for generations to come. The debt had been paid in full, not just in money but in love, in partnership, in the building of a life that honored everything they had fought for. And that, Sarah would have said if she could, was worth more than all the cattle in Montana, more than all the gold in the world. It was worth everything.